10-Minute Jazz Lesson Podcast, episode 251. Hey everybody, welcome back to episode 251 of the 10-Minute Jazz Lesson Podcast. We start the month of March here for all of us Northerners. We're starting to see some signs of spring, although as I look out my window right now, it is currently snowing, but at least we have something to look forward to. Really hope all of you out there are staying safe and healthy and doing well. And this month we're starting a brand new series. This is going to be much like the Charlie Parker series we did, only this month we're going to be looking at the amazing and legendary Miles Davis and talking about some of the aspects of his playing. So before we jump into the show, I do want to let you know that you can get a PDF worksheet that goes along with this episode, as well as every other episode that we've ever done on the show. That means 251 episodes by going to our Patreon site. You can support us directly there if you enjoy this podcast. So you can do that by going to 10minutejazzlesson.com, clicking on one of the Patreon banners, get yourself signed up, and you get instant access to all those materials. Got some new patrons to thank this week. Thank you to our new $3 patron, Chris. Thank you to our two new $5 patrons, Derek and Walter. Welcome to the family. And of course, as always, thank you to everybody over there, over 300 people that are supporting the podcast on a monthly basis. So 10minutejazzlesson.com, click on one of the Patreon banners, get yourself going on that subscription. All right, let's jump into today's episode. So Miles Davis, really one of the greatest musicians who ever lived. And one of the things that I love about this musician is all of the different stages that he went through in his career. Listening to his albums from the beginning of his career to the end of his career, it's like listening to a dozen different people. And he really embodied the true ethos of a jazz musician that you should never really stand still. You should always be looking toward the future, trying to get your playing and your conception to that next level. And he didn't put a lot of stock in kind of coming up with one lane and staying in it. A pretty courageous musician. So what we're going to talk about today is his use of simple harmonic devices, and through using them with great phrasing and a great sense of melody, you can really make some very, very simple stuff sound absolutely genius. So one thing that we talk about a lot on this podcast is like really advanced harmonic materials. How do we do chord substitutions? How do we use the diminished dominant scale to create tension? Sometimes you want to use that stuff. And Miles Davis did use a lot of that stuff in his playing, but the other half of his playing was about as simple as it gets. I'm talking using just chord tones or major pentatonic scales or very basic triads. And that's what we're going to look at today. And in fact, what we're going to look at is portions of his solo from Olio, the great rhythm changes composition. And this was recorded in 1956 with one of his great quintets. And the reason that I chose this is because on rhythm changes, a lot of us tend to think about the most complicated possible thing that we can do. And Miles Davis does a great job of showing you with the right phrasing, the right feel, we can play the simplest stuff you can think of, and it's going to be the most swinging, joyful thing to listen to. So I've got two phrases pulled from his solo. I transcribed this solo a couple of years ago where he's playing very much inside the chord changes, and he's playing with a really simple rhythmic scheme, a really simple harmonic scheme, and yet somehow it's way more interesting than if somebody were weaving in and out of the changes, playing a whole bunch of substitutions, a lot of eighth notes. So we really want to get inside of this, and I want you to harness the ability to be able to do this. Because actually, when you play really simple, framed against other parts of the solo where you're playing more complicated, more advanced things, there's nothing better than that. It's that juxtaposition, with the really complicated tension and release against the really simple, well thought out, melodic inside stuff. So let's take a look at the first phrase. What I'm going to do first is play it for you. This is the first 4 measures of his solo. This is how he comes into his solo on Olio. I've slowed it down a lot just so you can really hear the interaction between the chords and the melody that he's playing. So check out your PDF. This is example number 1. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. One, two, 1, 2, 3, 4. So that's it, just a simple 4-bar phrase. And you could hear, in fact, he's really only using 4 notes. The first measure is playing off of the third and the root of the 1 chord. And then the second measure, he just adapts those same 2 notes to the 2/5 that's happening, plays the root of the 2 chord down to the root of the 5 chord, right? But really what makes it work here is the fact that it's a motive. So it's the same idea twice, but what he does the second time around, so if you look at measure 3 and 4 of example number 1, he just displaces that first note so that you get a theme and variations. You get a motive, and then you get a slight variation of that. In the first measure, he's going 1, 2, 3, 4. And then in the third measure, he's going 1 and 2 and 3, 4. And that makes all the difference in the world, right? Basically playing that same idea with a slight rhythmic displacement. But everything is totally inside the changes. No long 8th note runs here, and it's super catchy. You can remember that after one time of hearing it, it's going to kind of get stuck in your head. And what he's doing is he's setting the stage for stuff that's going to come after. He's giving you this really fun, easy to remember melody. And then as he gets further into his solo, we're going to hear that he starts doing a little bit more complicated things. All right. So there's example number 1. Very, very simple, but very, very powerful. So now example number 2 is going to be slightly longer. It's going to be 8 measures. Again, this is just the second A section of rhythm changes in B flat. And I love what he does here. A little bit more complicated, but still very much inside the changes and very simple at the end of the day. So let's check out example number 2. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. One, two, 1, 2, 3, 4. Really nice phrase, isn't it? And he kind of puts a period on the end of it really, really nicely. So let's dive into this. The first thing that you will notice is there are not any non-diatonic notes. Every single note that he plays fits every single chord that's going on behind it. He never does anything that's outside of the scale. You will notice that he is following the harmony very, very precisely. It's not that he's ignoring the chords. He's actually playing perfectly within them, but he doesn't feel the need to go outside of it. So one of the things that I think makes this so effective, again, is the rhythm, right? The way that he's phrasing it. He really uses in measure 2, 3, and 4, the combination of dotted quarter notes with 8th notes on the and after it to really frame this, to really make it memorable. It turns it into something with kind of a through line. You could tell that it's well thought out, right? And then what he does at the end, I really like this. So he's using a lot of quarter notes and dotted quarter notes in the first 5 measures of this phrase. But then at the end of it, he puts kind of a period on it by playing an 8th note line in measures 6 and 7 to kind of end that. And it just has a really nice texture to it. Everything's kind of legato and flowing. And then we get this really nice measure and a half 8th note line to say, hey, this phrase is over and we're ready to go to the bridge here. So I really appreciate this one. Here's what I want you to do for your homework. I want you to take that second example, take the chord changes from that second example, and I want you to write a couple of phrases, a couple of 8-bar phrases over that set of chord changes, but do not do anything super complicated. What this really is a phrasing exercise, because I'm not allowing you to do anything very interesting with the harmony. I want you to think like Miles Davis, only play diatonic notes, and even limit yourself a little bit more than that. Maybe only use chord tones or even triads. So by limiting yourself on the harmonic end, you're really going to have to push yourself in terms of phrasing and rhythm in order to make it interesting. So that's what I want you to do. Write at least 2 8-bar phrases, and if you really want to be a superstar, write 4 or 5 of them and see if you can write something that you're really happy with, something that's really catchy, and something that, regardless of the fact that it's not very harmonically complicated, still sounds great and you would want to hear a soloist play over these changes. Okay. Study those Miles Davis ones first, though. Play them a bunch of times over the piano backing tracks that I'm going to give you. Then sit down and start to write your own. This is one thing that I really appreciate about Miles. He can play the most advanced stuff in the world, but he doesn't always feel the need to do that. He's such a good musician that he can play really simple things, and you will love it just as much as the most complicated stuff. All right, let me know if you have any questions. You can get in touch with me on the 10-Minute Jazz Lesson Community Facebook group, or you can email me at 10minutejazzlesson@gmail.com. Remember to grab the worksheets. That's really going to help you. You can do that by going to 10minutejazzlesson.com, clicking on one of the Patreon banners, and getting yourself signed up to be a patron of the 10-Minute Jazz Lesson podcast. Thank you to everybody that has done that. All right, have a great weekend. Really looking forward to the next episodes in this series, and I hope you are as well. Talk to you soon, everybody. Stay safe and healthy out there. Bye.